Hello and welcome again to one of our regular Mosaic coffee breaks. This again has a special guest, being Paul Bennett, who is one of the collaborators within Mosaic, being a partner in Bennett Briegel, and Paul focuses on regulatory issues. And this is part 2 of our discussion and coffee break with Paul.
Questions and issues at the moment really result from the economic impact and solvency criteria ratios which have hitherto applied. Firms are going to be stretched to the limit, and I wonder whether the SRA are looking to be more proactive in that or more tolerant.
I think provided they get good information, I think they're pretty tolerant. Intervention is the option of last resort for them. They basically can't afford it. So intervention wise, there's a real appetite from them to avoid that. So in that scenario, they're looking at orderly closure. They're also looking at, if firms can't afford to pay their professional indemnity insurance, they're giving an extended period of cover, and they've just talked about offering a second extended period. That's the SRA trying to avoid firms falling over. So I don't think the SRA will be anything other than tolerant if you are open, honest, and engage with them. If somebody is not open, honest, and doesn't engage with them, then of course the intervention risk remains sort of higher.
At what stage should they engage? If they're worried about their cash flow?
I would engage as soon as there is a risk to clients, and to report it as this is a risk, this is what we're doing to manage that risk. So I've just been advising a COLP whose firm has closed. It's been an orderly closure. It's been sort of 5 months in the making, but essentially that was financial stability. And the SRA were entirely, supportive of the fact they were receiving information. They were satisfied there was no risk to clients, there was no risk of dishonesty, there was an orderly closure planned, and they were content with it.
So if you're Barry and you've got a 13-week cash flow forecast showing now in 12 weeks' time you're going to breach your limits, is that the time to talk to the SRA? No,
that's probably the time to talk to your bank, to your funders, to your partners, to raise capital to alleviate that.
Well, that's always the tack that we take.
Yeah, and that's the sense. When you go that little bit further and there is a risk of failure because those conversations haven't borne fruit, that's when you should be talking to them. We'll continue to see finance, but as an alternative, this is our potential closure plan.
Paul, one of the other areas that I've become aware of in the last couple of weeks is I'm getting firm leaders saying to me, this is fine, it's keeping the plate spinning, but we won't know for some time what this is doing to the cohesion of our partnership group, of our teams, etc., etc. And how do you see supervision, management, file review being impacted by this?
I think you've got to set the standards, and it's got to be done through training. I think enhanced file reviews are an obvious thing to do, so that you're aware of what the trends might be in different departments. I was talking to somebody last week. They are not pricing in a coherent way, but they're not file reviewing in a coherent way. They're not setting the standards in a coherent way. They're that classic, you've got the law firm umbrella there, Bloggs and Co, LLP, but actually, Mr. Bloggs and Mr. Co are long since gone, and you've got 5 people with 5 different offices working in radically different ways. And the best practice in terms of supervision, setting the values, you look to the dispersed business models, the Gunner Cooks, the Excello laws, where they set those centralised standards, and you make sure that you hold people to account against them. It's more important than ever.
Yeah, it does demand, Paul, that those firms that still have paper files move digital. you can't review paper files at the moment. You can review electronic files.
The reality is that, if you've got any dinosaurs, I'm really sorry. This is 2020 and they need to adapt the way they're working. And paper files do not work in the modern era. They don't work anyway because of the burden they put on a firm in normal time. But they certainly don't work in a era of home working and supervision on a remote basis.
What are you seeing as emerging trends and things that you're working on, things that you would really like to highlight?
I think in the early days of the COVID challenge, what really struck me was that firms took the opportunity to solve some of those irritations that they'd always had. So I had 2 or 3 instructions on terms of business. I'm just starting to see that again as a trend. Firms have come through a bit of a dip. They're preparing for the next stage. So I think that's a definite trend. They're thinking about underperformers. There's no sugarcoating that. That's going to be the trend of the next 6 months, and the financial pressures will be the final trigger that facilitates that those conversations having to happen. Actually, probably our growing trend is the online training. I think where we are at the moment is firms are starting to plan for the future. They don't know what the future looks like. They're not yet ready to make decisions, but they're starting to think about those difficult decisions ahead. I would say to anybody listening in or watching this, just start to think about what good looks like and hope for the best, but also start to plan for the worst.
You mentioned earlier on professional indemnity insurance. I've been hearing some strange whispers about the state of the market, and also a sense that insurers are nervous about the risks that the new form of working increases. Are you looking at October as being a difficult time for many firms?
Yeah, it is. It's going to be a really difficult time for firms. Cash flow is obviously under challenge. More importantly than that, the market is hardening. There is a anxiety around supervision. There's an anxiety around cash flow and whether or not firms are going to be able to be sustainable. And of course, what really scares insurers is picking up the 6-year run-off cover when they're not paid for it. Because if they take on a firm or they continue to insure a firm that can't afford to pay its run-off cover, if it is forced to close, they are all on the hook without any way of recouping those. So that said, good firms who are able to explain the training that they've done, the changes to their systems, and to demonstrate proactive risk management to their broker so their broker can explain it to the underwriter, they will continue to get decent prices. So I talked to somebody last week who had renewed, and even in this hard market, the renewal figure was broadly within a couple of £100 as what it had been the previous year. So if you think about that in a hardening market, that's a really good outcome. But of course, they'd spent some time thinking about how they were going to demonstrate how they were able to supervise, and that actually there was no additional risk. And it was explaining their risk management approach that probably kept them where they were.
Yeah, the issue that you highlight about the potential for not getting paid for the runoff cover means that they will be looking even harder at solvency, won't they?
They will, and if anybody's offered an 18-month period of insurance, and they're renewing between now and October, I would be taking that.
Are you getting a sense from the market, Paul, about figures? What sort of increases in premium might we be looking at in October?
I haven't got a detailed, but anywhere between 5 and 10% is what the brokers are telling me that they're routinely getting the work out. But what concerned a couple of the brokers that I spoke to was that the fees that came back, the proposals that came back, were sort of 22% higher than previous years. And they were therefore struggling to place them and struggling to be competitive. And the larger brokers, that wasn't the case, but the smaller brokers, that was the case. So, it's another good reason for working with at least two, provided you're prepared to do the hard yards and make sure they don't overlap. Because if you send the same proposal,
Yeah, they hate that.
They'll load you.
Yeah. Paul, thanks very much for that. That's wonderful to see you in the flesh, so to speak, during one of our Mosaic sessions.
I must join again and talk less.
No.